Hello everyone, this is Jen Espinosa-Goswami coming to you live from Weightless, my page over here. Thank you so much for joining me. If you are tuning in live, please comment on this video so I can see who's joining me. I am super excited about today's topic because it's one that we don't like to talk about, especially as women. And I'm a little nervous too because I'm going to get really vulnerable about failure in my own life in an effort to let you know a little bit more about me and to let you know that it's okay to be afraid of failure and it's okay to be vulnerable. And if you want to do that during the course of this video by commenting on this video, liking this video, giving me hearts, or if you'd like to do it more privately in a one-on-one conversation with me, I invite you to join in today. So let's talk about failure. Now, this came up because I was meeting with someone this week, and it's someone that I admire very much. She had mentioned to me that she was focusing on improving her health. And it had been several months since she mentioned that to me, and I noticed that she still felt stuck. She wasn't quite where she wanted to be, and what have you. So I reached out to her and said, "Hey, can we sit down and talk?" So she was completely open to that, and during the course of our conversation, a lot of things came up, and not all of them had to do with health. And the idea of failure came up. So I'd like to kind of dive into failure, what it is in our lives, how it shows up, what we tend to do about it, and even more importantly, what we can do to break away from this fear of failing. So first of all, failure, what is it? Well, obviously it's not feeling like we're not measuring up in some way. And I tend to think of failure as something that shows up in different ways for different people. So for some people, failure feels like something that they don't have in terms of, like maybe they don't have a certain house. Do you hear Betsy? Betsy's howling in the background. She's so cute. Sorry about that. So some people, failure shows up as in what they don't have. Example, they don't have the right kind of house that they're looking for. They don't have a certain car. They don't have their dream job that they went to college for. They don't have a slim and sexy body that they used to have before they had kids. I mean, for some people, failure is, I don't have something because either someone else that I admire or is in my circle has it, and or I used to have it and I no longer have it. So it could be something they have or don't have. That's how failure can show up. And what comes up big for folks who are in this court is comparisonitis. They compare themselves to other people. So we'll talk a little bit about that later on. What other ways does failure show up? There's another way it can show up. It can show up in how you present yourself. So for example, if you're a person who doesn't feel comfortable in your skin, and I see this a lot with women, is you might not take as much effort with doing your hair. You might not wear pants all day long. You go barefoot. You might put less care and attention into your personal appearance, especially if you feel that you're not at the size or shape that you would wish to be. So it could show up in terms of how you present yourself. This also can show up in an office environment. I worked for 16 years in an office environment, financial services, super exciting times. But how this showed up for a lot of people I worked with was they didn't show up fully for meetings. I mean, many of us would go to meetings and have no clue what we were talking about, right? Especially when you're in all day long meetings. But what I mean about failure is a different way. So you don't show up for meetings, you don't have your agenda ready, you don't even know what room it was in 2 minutes before you head off to go to the room, and you are not, because you're not prepared, you're not ready, you see no reason why you should contribute to the conversation. And I've been in so many meetings before where it was dead zone, it was silent, no one was contributing, and to me that just drove me nuts because I hated being in an environment where everyone was just kind of like looking out of the corner of their eye at everyone else. Ooh, is this person going to talk? Is that person going to talk? Super annoying, and I hated it in an office environment, but that can sometimes be the default, and that could be because you feel like you failed. Maybe you failed to prepare yourself for the meeting. Maybe you failed to send some key information to someone in your office or your environment. Maybe you even failed to recognize that you had a meeting scheduled for that day until just before the meeting. So that could show up in terms of how you present yourself. Do you iron your clothes? Do you take care of with your appearance? Do you show up? either physically or feeling like you're showing up as prepared and as you can be. Another way that failure can show up. Hi, thanks for joining us. Please let me know who's joining in the comments so I can see that you're here. Another way that failure can show up, and the one that I'm most concerned with as a health coach, is how you feel. Yeah, we're gonna go into that territory. How you feel. And this is what came up with the conversation of this woman I was speaking about. So she, on the outside, she looks to be successful. She looks to be like she's got her stuff together. She always presents herself very well. I've never heard her speak ill of anyone else, that sort of thing. But she didn't feel in her heart of hearts like she was successful. She didn't feel that she's at the place where she needs to be, where she wants to be, where she dreamed she could be. She felt like a failure. And this is the piece that I'm most concerned with. And this is the piece that is the hardest to unearth, especially in my own personal life. And I'll go into that in a little bit. But I'd like for you to comment on this video right now. How does failure, fear and failure kind of go hand in hand, but how does failure show up for you? Does it show up in what you have or you don't have? Does it show up in how you present yourself, whether you take care and attention in your appearance, or how closely you fit the standard stereotypical role that you find yourself in? And then finally, how does failure feel to you? Do you feel like you're living a lie? Like you are not living to your potential? Do you feel like people compliment you and that you just throw those compliments aside because it's just not connecting with you? You don't see it, you don't feel it, you don't live it. Those are the three ways that failure can show up in our lives. And I'll go into a short story about how I deal with failure and some failures I've had in the past. I'm not super excited to share all this with you, but I need to go deep in order to help you feel comfortable and that you're in a trusting relationship with me. Yeah, even though this is just a video and this is just my Facebook page, I do want to establish trust with you. If I don't go there, how are you going to be able to go there? So I honor people who are willing to go there after knowing me for a short time, but here's so you can learn a little bit more about me and feel like we have comfortable boundaries with each other. So for me, failure is less about what other people have or what I don't have. But one of the ways that failure shows up big time for me is financially. Yes, I'm going there, and this is really hard for me to talk about. Okay, so when I was growing up, my family did not have a lot of money. We were on a budget. We couponed. We, got 2-for-1 deals. We shopped at Goodwill and rummage sales. We did no cost or low cost activities as a family together. Disneyland was never a whisper of a dream when I was growing up because it was way too expensive. Everywhere we traveled, and we did travel every year, I didn't lack for anything, but whenever we traveled, it was always a car trip. I didn't fly until I was in college. And that was very fortunate that I was able to fly and afford to fly when I was in college. But so I didn't have a lot. I lived in lack when I was growing up financially. And what that taught me was that I needed to start earning, and as soon as possible. So I did. When I was 15 years old, I started working at the local Six Flags Great America. I started earning at the age of 15. Now, some of you might be like, well, I started babysitting at 12, 13, whatever. Maybe that was fun money. Maybe you loved kids, all that sort of thing. That was not my deal. I wanted to work in the working force, the W-2 employee, working for the big man kind of environment. And that followed me up until just last October when I finally quit working for the man, and now I'm working for myself. But finances have always been key to me. So I paid my way through college. My folks did not have the kind of money I was the fourth kid, and they didn't have anything to contribute to my college education, which was fine. I was able to afford my own way to study abroad, which was not cheap. But everything that I've accomplished financially in my life has been as a result of my own hard work and efforts. I've received assistance. I'm not going to say I haven't. I had to donate plasma when I was in college. Sometimes that happens, right? Sometimes you run low on money and you do what you need to do. So I've always been a very much, you work hard for what money you get, and you just work hard. That's at the end of the day, that's what happens. So for me, although I don't set a certain money amount as to what I need to be earning to feel like I'm a wonderful, successful person, I do not feel successful when I cannot consistently contribute money towards my family. I don't feel successful. I feel like a failure if I'm not contributing money to my family. So for me, that's how it shows up. And that has been a lesson and a story that I have experienced, that I've gone through in my childhood, and it continues to follow me. So that's something that I continue to work on. Another way that failure shows up for me. Hi, thanks for joining us today. We're talking about failure and how you can kind of get past that, how it shows up for you, and ways it can show up for you, and how you can enjoy yourself, yes, while you're failing. So we'll get to that. Thank you, Marianne, for joining. So glad to see you're here. Another way that failure shows up for me is in my role as a mom. I had been in and out of the workforce for several times. One of the companies I work for went under a couple of years ago, so I became a stay-at-home mom. Hi, Marianne. I became a stay-at-home mom during the summertime, so my kids were off of school, and I was a full-time mom, and I didn't know how to fit in that role. So I have a certain perception, I'm sure we all do, of what a stay-at-home mom looks, acts, and feels like, right? And to me, that perception was not a good thing. So I was going into this situation with the idea that I would not be a stay-at-home mom for very long. So I didn't put my 100% commitment into it. And maybe you have things in your life that you don't put 100% commitment to. That's fine, but the results you get are somewhat equivocal to what you put into it, right? So I didn't put a lot into it. I spent a lot of time and stress trying to figure out, okay, how do I do this? How do I do it on the cheap? Because now we're down to one income. How do I do it in a way that it allows me to have a good time, allows my kids to have a good time, and doesn't drive me nuts? It was a growing experience for sure. So those are just two examples in my personal life of how I dealt with failure and how I still continue to deal with failure. Yes, I'm a stay-at-home mom. My kids are in school. I have found my flow with that now. But I still continue to work on the financial piece of it. So I challenge you, Marianne, and whoever else is joining us today or watching the replay, to get out a piece of paper and write down how failure shows up for you and how does that make you feel. I know for me personally, when I feel like I'm not being a very good stay-at-home mom, that makes me feel like crap. That makes me feel like, well, there are other people who are being really good at this stay-at-home mom thing. And so I start looking for clues, right? What does success look like? What does success as a stay-at-home mom look like? This is what it looks like. So I look to examples, I look to images, I look to stories, I look to my friends, I look to my family. What stories exist for me? What role models are out there that exist for me to understand what success looks like? And that is a piece that we can't escape from, right? It could work for you in that way from a health sense. So if you're someone who's trying to go back to a certain size or weight that you were previously, and it has eluded you this long, you may feel like, I just have to give up. Because I've tried, and nothing is happening. So your perception of yourself in this moment is, I can never go back to that because I've already tried and it's not working. Whereas you have to somehow put yourself back into that mindset. Now, how do you do that if you're someone who has never been thin? I personally have never been thin. I have never been underweight, certainly, but I've always been overweight. Even when I lost my 100 pounds, I was still overweight by medical term definition. I didn't feel overweight, but that's technically what I was. And this reminds me of an article I saw recently about Pink, the pop star. I will pop it in the comments after I finish this video, but it's amazing because she said, well, by medical standards, I'm obese, but all I feel like is me. And she's post-baby, you know, her baby was born 3 months ago. But what a beautiful perspective, right? She is still herself, only better. And she is able to embrace that, even though on the outside and the role she has taken on for herself as a new mom of a new kid is, oh, I should have dropped the weight by now. She said, I am me and I feel like me and that's good. And that's where I am, and I'm good with that, I'm comfortable with that, and I love who I am. Not all of us can get there, right? But first what you need to do is create that awareness around what failure shows up like for you, and how does it make you feel. I also want to encourage you, because I'm a coach and I love you and I love that you're part of my community, and I want you to feel amazing regardless of whether you ever reach your goal or not. If you need help with your goal, let's have a conversation, completely private. I will never share anything about you, and I only want what's best for you. But we need to have a conversation and talk it through before we can get to that point. But what I'd like to say to cheer you on is, yes, failure shows up. And I challenge you to write it down, because when you write it down, you can't hide from it anymore, right? And it's as simple as just taking out a piece of paper and a pen or a pencil and writing down free association, freehand, whatever they call it, stream of consciousness. Write down everything. What makes you feel like you're failing today? Write it down. If you're brave, I encourage you to share it in the comments here. We're all in a supportive community here. We're all here for each other. There's no comparisonitis or bigger than thou kind of feeling in this community. At least that's not something I will ever encourage. And if there's any trolls, I will kick them out of this group. But the interesting thing is, when you write down your failure, you look at it differently, right? Because all of a sudden, instead of being stuck inside of you, it's outside of you, and you can look at it more objectively. You can look at it as someone who's not from the inside, who is not subjective, who is not in the moment of what that failure feels like. What does failure feel like? It feels like you've done everything you can. It feels like you are not meant to be whatever your future goal is. It feels like you are pretending. It feels like you're faking it. It feels like you don't have any passion when you get up in the morning. It feels like being stuck. It feels like running across a brick wall over and over and over. It feels like repeating the same things you've been doing that have caused you so much frustration in the past. You don't need to sit in failure anymore. I can't promise you that you will ever achieve your goal. No one can. What I can promise you is the more times you fail and the faster you fail, the more likely you will reach your goal. I want to share a quick story with you before we sign off on this video, and let me know if you have any questions that come up. I'd love to answer your questions live. One of these, the things that I never shared too much with folks in my community is when I first set out to lose weight, I didn't set a specific goal because I would have hit upon my fear of failure. I never dieted as a kid. I was never interested in dieting as a kid. And so the first time I dieted, I was like, I have no idea if I'm going to be good at this, but I will try. Because I took that pressure off of myself to be a certain something, I was able to succeed at what I was doing, right? I didn't put any pressure on myself. I didn't sketch out what my after picture would look like. I didn't say it's going to be by this date and then feel like an utter failure when I didn't reach that date. There should never be any like random things assigned to your goal. Your goal should be, how are you going to feel? How are things going to be different for you? What space will you inhabit? What types of people will you spend time with? It should never be, I got to do it by XYZ date and I'm going to do it this way. And because you can't plan for what happens in the meanwhile, right? Over a year ago, my father got sick with cancer. And I talked to my mom, and she literally could not plan out her future because she had no idea what was going to happen. Every day was a new day. She didn't know how sick Dad was going to be. She didn't know whether he was going to recover. She didn't know where she needed to be at any given moment. And if you've ever gone through a family crisis, you understand what that feels like. You cannot always predict things. You cannot always promise that things will happen in a certain way. And sometimes, if you are not fully prepared mentally, physically, spiritually, emotionally, you will sabotage yourself without even knowing it when you set these smart goals because you're afraid to fail. I'm afraid to fail. You're afraid to fail. It's a part of human life, right? We all are afraid to fail in something. What I will tell you though is people like Einstein and Michael Jordan and Steve Jobs, they're miserable failures. And yet we look to them as our biggest success stories. Isn't it time you became a miserable failure so you could be a big success story? I failed at even trying to eat healthy until I finally started doing it and prepared myself mentally. And I was able to go on the cover of a magazine. I was able to be in Reader's Digest and Women's Health and Prevention. I'm blessed because I'm not afraid to share it anymore, because it's happened. I made it work. I figured it out. Yeah, there were times I failed. There were times I set specific goals, like, oh, I'm going to lose 5 more pounds by the end of this month, and it didn't happen. I didn't give up. So just to recap everything we've talked about today, I don't want to go too much longer, maybe 1 or 2 minutes. We talked about failure and its impact on our success. So how does failure show up for you? Make sure to comment on here if you watched the entire video. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. How does failure show up for you? Does it show up in what you have or you don't have? Does it show up in how you present yourself, or does it show up in how you feel? All of those things are equally important, and you might have a combination of all three. And then failure, why is it stopping you from doing what you want to do? You need to put it into the light and acknowledge it and put it outside of yourself. So write it down. Share it with someone if you want. You don't have to. You can keep it secret. Share it with me if you feel compelled to do so underneath this video in the comments. Share or feel the fear. Act it out. Understand what it's doing to your mindset. And then finally, know that failure is the only way that we can finally succeed. And our biggest success stories in our society have shown us that this is true. So it's okay to be a failure. You want to be a failure. The more you fail at something, the more likely you will finally achieve it. Thank you so much for joining me today. This is Jen Espinosa-Goswami over at Weightless. I can't wait to hear from you in your comments, and let me know what you'd like me to talk about next week for my live stream. We're going to go back to Tuesday next week, Tuesday at noon Central Time. So let me know what you'd like me to talk about for next week, and have yourself a wonderful afternoon. Bye-bye.